Thanks to Ali being gone, I can play around so freely, it's like a whole new world, man. Yeah, seriously, thanks for being gone, Ali. My son's words made me pause. They were exactly the same as what was written on a photo I saw in my daughter-in-law's coffin. Maybe, just maybe, that terrible prank wasn't actually my son's doing. As I began to think about it, I couldn't shake the feeling that my son was suspicious. After seeing the two off for their outing, I decided to search my daughter-in-law's room to see if there was anything left behind. There was no doubt that my daughter-in-law's passing was an accident. But I couldn't forgive their attitudes, and I couldn't shake the thought that something else might have happened. Even though it was just a matter of duty, I desperately searched, relying on my mother's intuition. In the sparsely decorated room, I found a diary. Ali, sorry for reading this without permission. I apologized silently as I flipped through the pages. With a tense expression, I continued reading the diary, hoping to find some truth. What was written there far exceeded my expectations, detailing numerous horrible events. Are you kidding me? Harry wasn't the only one, but even my husband was involved in such things? What I found there were numerous heinous acts against the two daughters-in-law that I didn't know about. Instead of showing remorse, the attitudes of my husband and son seemed to worsen, prompting me to seek revenge. I'm Violet. I'll be 62 this year. I've been living with my son's family, and I thought we got along reasonably well. But it all fell apart suddenly. One day, my daughter-in-law got into a traffic accident and became a victim. With only my son Harry left, Ali, my daughter-in-law, was like a precious daughter to me. Ali lost her parents early, and she had looked up to me as a mother figure. Despite her gentle demeanor, Ali, who was considerate and kind, was so dear to me that it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say I cared for her more than my son. Losing such a cherished daughter-in-law left me in despair for a while. Mom, we also have to prepare for Ali's funeral, so please don't stay down forever. Be strong. Yeah, you're right. We need to stay strong. Ali wouldn't want us to be distressed. Urged by my son, I finally faced Ali's accident and began to deal with the procedures. I was so deeply saddened that I couldn't understand at the time why my son seemed so unaffected. On the day of the funeral, I cried until my eyes were swollen red. Ali was a hard worker, diligently working at my relative's company. I heard about what a thoughtful and kind girl she was, and the funeral was attended by many relatives who mourned her loss. Thank you so much for everything. Thank you for being my daughter. As I bid farewell to her while saying those words, I couldn't help but notice a photo inside the coffin. Taking it in my hand, it was a family photo taken when we went on a family trip. Someone must have thought it was a good idea to include it. That's what I thought, but strangely, Ali wasn't in the photo. It wasn't originally taken without her. She should have been at the far edge of the photo, but she was cut out. Curious, I absent-mindedly flipped it over, and handwritten words jumped out at me, "Thanks for being gone." Shocked by the unexpected and horrifying words, I let out a gasp and sat down right there. Mom, what's wrong? This. I showed the photo to my son, pale-faced. My son's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly dismissed it, saying, "It's just a prank," and pocketed the photo, returning to his seat. I couldn't believe my son's reaction and instinctively called out to him, raising my voice. Just a prank? That's ridiculous. Who would do something so insensitive in a place like this? Please, be quiet until the funeral is over. We can talk about it later. Talk about it later? How can we possibly calm down when there might be someone here capable of doing such a thing? Ali deserves better. I pleaded desperately with my son, but he shook his head, refusing to engage with me. Instead, he seemed to find my raised voice in such a solemn setting irritating, even giving me a look of annoyance. Feeling convinced that there was someone with malicious intent who had put this photo in Ali's coffin, I couldn't calm down. Driven by confusion, I rushed out of the funeral hall, pulling out my phone to call the police. Anyway, there's someone here who did something so malicious. I'm sorry, my mother is just very distraught. She's not herself. The officers who arrived listened empathetically to my story, but they said there was no way to determine who had put it there. Even when I explained that my daughter-in-law was killed in a traffic accident and that the driver responsible had already been caught, and there were no leads on any other suspects, the police officers just looked puzzled, as if they were at a loss. Hey, can't you calm down already? Making such a fuss like this won't let Ali rest in peace. Yeah, Mom. Dad's right. Furthermore, my son and husband, the very people I needed support from, started calling my agitation over a mere prank embarrassing. My gentle husband and son, who tried to calm down their distraught family member who had lost important loved ones. That's how it must have looked to the police. But from my perspective, it was far more terrifying to see the two of them acting nonchalantly despite what had been done during our family member's funeral.
Hey, why? Even if it's just a prank, it's malicious. Why can you stay so calm about it?
Just because. Making a fuss like this won't make Allie happy. Yeah, exactly. What's the point of trying to find the culprit? Perhaps to the other mourners at the funeral, it may have seemed like I was just making a scene for no reason. After being told by other relatives to calm down, I obediently returned to my seat. Despite it being a family funeral, the fact that the two of them didn't shed a single tear made me suspicious beyond belief. They promised to talk after the funeral, so I managed to keep myself strong at least for the duration of the service. I had to bid farewell to my precious daughter-in-law properly. With that sentiment in my heart, I tightly gripped my handkerchief throughout the funeral. After returning home from the funeral, I finally had a conversation with the two of them. When I demanded to find the culprit who put that photo and make them apologize to my daughter-in-law, they exchanged glances and shook their heads, saying something outrageous. Isn't it possible that Allie might have earned someone's grudge?
What are you talking about?
Anyway, since it's just a prank, there's no need to make such a fuss. Allie can't do anything about it now. With that, they chuckled and left without listening to me any further. Even though they should have been important to each other, why did they become so cold? I couldn't understand and could only feel disappointed in them. After the funeral, they didn't even pray in front of Allie's photo, and they frowned at me when I did it, showing their disdain. Maybe one of them wasn't the one who put that photo. As such thoughts crossed my mind, they started doing things that seemed to confirm it. My husband, who had always enjoyed activities like horse racing, and my son, who had been influenced by him. Since the funeral, they had been going out to play quite frequently. I must say, you two seem to be having quite a good time. Must be nice to have such a good budget for outings. We're doing okay as usual. It's just that we got some money for entertainment purposes. Where did you get that money from? It's from Allie's insurance. I was speechless at my son's casual remark about something so outrageous. Of all things, these two had referred to the insurance money from the deceased family member as money for entertainment. Unable to say anything in response to their heartless words, I lost faith in them. While I stood there pale-faced and speechless, they continued speaking with a laugh.
Thanks to Allie being gone, we can play around so freely, it's like a whole new world, man. Yeah, seriously, thanks for being gone, Allie.
My son's words made me startle. Come to think of it, the same words were written on the back of the photo I saw that time. I began to wonder if my son had actually done it, and I couldn't help but feel increasingly suspicious of him. After seeing the two off for their outing, I decided to search my daughter-in-law's room to see if there was anything left behind. It had been left untouched since the accident. I searched through my daughter-in-law's room, looking around everywhere for anything that might have been left behind. Despite being repeatedly urged by my son and husband to clean up quickly, I couldn't bring myself to tackle it right away and left things as they were. It was in that sparsely furnished room that my son's character became apparent. I found a diary.
Allie, sorry for reading this without permission.
With that apology in my heart, I turned the pages. With a nervous demeanor, I read through the diary, hoping to find some truth. What I found there far exceeded my expectations. It was a series of terrible events. Are you kidding me? Not just Harry, but even my husband was involved in such things? The diary detailed numerous harassments from my husband and son. It seemed my husband had been treating Allie like a servant in my absence, issuing various orders and harassment. Furthermore, there were accounts of discussions with my son about these issues. However, it seemed my son refused to listen and even joined in on disparaging behavior with my husband. Under the guise of decency, they repeatedly harassed her behind closed doors, and Allie endured it all without complaint, as recorded over many days. Seeing this, a question arose in my mind.
Why didn't you ever talk to me about it?
While I felt sorry for not realizing the abnormal situation regarding Allie, I couldn't help but wonder why she never confided in me. Despite thinking that she cherished me like her own mother, I had never been told such stories. Feeling anxious that I might have missed out on hearing her side of things somewhere along the line, I stumbled upon this passage. I can't tell my mother-in-law the way I truly feel, I don't want to make her sad. Those words brought tears to my eyes once again. This kind-hearted daughter-in-law couldn't possibly have earned resentment from anyone. In the latter part of the diary, there were conflicting thoughts about whether she should consult me. In the midst of her turmoil, that accident took my son, her husband, away. Thinking of the pain my daughter-in-law must have endured, my heart felt like it was being torn apart. I clenched the diary tightly, deciding to seek revenge against the two of them. Before they returned home, I made calls here and there. I planned to strike them down to repay my son for choosing her as his wife. Fortunately, my daughter-in-law had earned the trust of many people due to her character. As a result, many were willing to assist me in my revenge. I made call after call as if possessed, requesting cooperation without revealing my true intentions. With each call, I was reminded of my daughter-in-law's virtues. That's what happened, I understand now. Please let me help. Thank you. I said my gratitude over the phone. Like me, there were many people who were furious with those two. While I was glad, I also felt a deep sense of regret. I wanted to let my daughter-in-law know that she had so many allies. With regret for not being able to protect her weighing heavily on my heart, I rallied myself. On a Sunday when the plan for revenge finally took shape, I summoned the two of them to a certain place. It was a restaurant, but there I first presented my husband with a pre-filled divorce form and asked for a divorce.
Huh? What's this all of a sudden?
It's not sudden.
Don't you have any idea why?
Could it be about Allie? As I nodded, my husband looked at me with a heavy sigh. Though my husband seemed to think it was a trivial matter, my determination remained firm. Listen, Allie died in a traffic accident, you know? Why do I have to get divorced because of that?
Don't you really have any idea? Put your hand on your heart and think carefully.
Mom, reconsider. Breaking up the family over something like this isn't right, is it? You two are the ones who broke it up. Harry, you too. Please leave the house. I also told my son, who had been playing the role of a mediator and acting as if it didn't concern him, to leave the house. He seemed to have just realized that he was involved too and started to panic, asking why all of a sudden. Originally, the house we were living in was one I had been paying the mortgage for. I didn't want these two, who had belittled my beloved daughter, to live there anymore. When they realized I was serious, they started apologizing to me in a conciliatory tone. We're sorry about the prank. If you need money, I can share some of the insurance money with you. Yeah, why don't we ask the people who attended the funeral right now? If it'll make you feel better, we can do that, Mom.
What I'm upset about isn't that.
I sighed at their off-target apologies this time. At this point, had they completely forgotten what they had done? If so, I needed to remind them. So, I placed the diary of my daughter-in-law, which I had in my bag, on the table. At first, both of them looked puzzled, but as I began to read the contents, both my husband and son started to pale. What's that? Why do you have something like that? It's Allie's diary.
It seems like you two were pretty cruel to her behind my back.
What do you mean by cruel? We were just getting along as a family, weren't we?
Using her and treating her like a servant in the house, is that what you call being a family?
Yeah, so what?
I was just teaching Allie, who didn't have parents, how to be dutiful to her parents.
The one who first showed his true colors without any remorse was my husband, Tom. He said things like he had been doing his daughter-in-law a favor by treating her like a servant, without feeling sorry at all. It was the first time I felt like slapping that detestable face of his. As for my son, Harry, he was stumbling over his words, trying to justify himself once the truth came out. After some pressing, he finally admitted that he had been influenced by his father's attitude. Despite making excuses, I was disappointed by their attitude, as if trying to imply that my daughter-in-law was also at fault. In the end, both of them concluded that my daughter-in-law wasn't part of their family at all. In my heart, I apologized to her, acknowledging that she hadn't been treated like family by them. Well, you know, I got mad because Allie seemed to be getting too full of herself, thinking she was better at work than me. She was just a daughter-in-law who couldn't even keep a smile on her husband's face. This is what happens when there's no parental guidance. Even after the funeral, she's still an ungrateful daughter.
She's not your daughter.
She's my only daughter. What are you talking about, Mom? You only have me as your child, right?
You're not my family anymore, either. Both of you, get out of my house.
My true family was only my daughter-in-law, Allie. After all the terrible things they had done without remorse, I didn't want to call them family anymore. The two of them, thinking they could intimidate me if they outnumbered me, stood up and raised their voices.
Are you trying to kick your family out of the house? And all for the sake of a stranger who's no longer in this world. You're the ones who took away her place here in the first place.
I shouted back without yielding an inch. Even as the table was pounded and they yelled at me, I glared at my husband without flinching. Perhaps frustrated by my unwavering defiance, my son reached out for the diary he was holding in his arms. Just as he was about to snatch it away, it was the president of the company where my daughter-in-law and son worked who stopped him.
Sir! What are you doing here?
I heard from Violet here.
Seems like you've been giving our precious employee a hard time.
Seeing someone step in just in time to mediate, I breathed a sigh of relief. In fact, without their knowledge, I had invited the president who knew my daughter-in-law and his colleagues to this meeting. Seeing his senior and junior colleagues, filled with anger, gathering behind my son, he seemed to tremble.
I was just planning to watch the discussion and leave, but since it seems like there's no remorse, I couldn't help but speak up. I'm not at fault. It was my father who took the lead and mistreated my wife.
Even so, didn't you do nothing to help? You thought your wife, who came to your home, was getting too full of herself just because she was good at her job, didn't you?
We don't need employees with such low popularity around here.
Surrounded by everyone, perhaps realizing they had no chance of winning, the two of them crumbled on the spot. Trying desperately to beg for forgiveness now, they even prostrated themselves on the floor, but I shook my head and said, "You're asking the wrong person for forgiveness."
Oh, but isn't even being on your knees too much to ask? I'm sure Allie wouldn't want to see your faces either.
With that, I left them behind and walked away. Seeing their thoroughly dejected faces, I finally felt a slight sense of relief, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Having them fill out divorce papers, my husband and I officially became strangers. Yet they still lingered in the house, unwilling to leave, so I gave them a stern warning and had movers come to take their belongings away. Now, they're barely managing to get by, having rented a small, cheap apartment. The president, who had shown kindness to my daughter-in-law, deeply apologized for failing to notice her situation like I had. He also expressed considerable indignation towards my son's attitude towards his wife, informing me that he terminated his employment contract. Although he's still hanging around as a part-time worker, he's apparently feeling quite uncomfortable at work, being glared at by colleagues who know the situation. As for my ex-husband, it seemed he had used up most of his savings on horse racing and would occasionally come to my house asking to borrow money. He would complain about being scolded by our son multiple times for his reckless spending, even though our livelihood was precarious. Despite being in such dire straits, my ex-husband would come crying to me, saying he couldn't even enjoy his one remaining pleasure of horse racing. Even when pushed to the brink, he showed no remorse for his actions, and I would repeatedly send him away, threatening to call the police.
Apologize to Allie. Though, even if you do, it won't make things right. I'm sorry. That's why I need you to lend me money. If you're truly sorry, why don't you find a part-time job or help our son? If our son abandons you, you'll really be left with nothing.
With that, I would shut the door in his face. For a while, my ex-husband would pound on the door, cursing me and my daughter-in-law, but if left alone long enough, he would eventually disappear. In the finally quiet living room, I clasped my hands together in prayer for my daughter-in-law. I still sometimes wonder and regret if I could have done something more for her as a mother, a little earlier. The photo I found in the coffin at the time was something both my son and husband vehemently claimed to know nothing about. While I initially thought one of them was behind the ongoing harassment, perhaps it was a message from my daughter-in-law all along.
Though it's too late to do anything for her now, I hope she finds some peace knowing what happened to the two of them, as I looked at the precious photo of my daughter and wished for that.